never planned on sharing this story publicly. Who would even believe something this messed up could happen in real life? But after the events of the past week, I need to tell someone what we went through. Just a heads up, this is going to be lengthy, and honestly, I'm still angry as I write this out. Let me take you back to when I was 14 years old and my younger brother Phoenix was 8. We appeared to be your average middle-class American family. Our father had a career in sales, our mother was a licensed realtor, and we occupied a comfortable house in a respectable Oregon neighborhood. Sure, our parents bickered frequently and seemed emotionally distant, but I didn't grasp just how dysfunctional everything truly was until it all fell apart. That particular afternoon began like any other. Phoenix and I took our usual bus ride home from school. I can still picture Phoenix's excitement over this ceramic bowl he'd crafted in his art class, eager to display it for our mother. When we stepped off at our regular stop, an unsettling feeling washed over me immediately. An unfamiliar vehicle sat in our driveway beside our father's pickup truck. As we approached our house, I noticed something that made zero sense. A sold sign had been planted firmly in our front lawn. My initial thought was that it belonged to a neighboring property or that Mom had temporarily placed it there since real estate was her profession. But then I spotted our mother standing beside a man in a business suit, beaming wider than I'd witnessed in years. Our father leaned casually against his truck, thumbing through what appeared to be a substantial stack of currency. The reality hit me like a freight train. Phoenix rushed forward, calling out, "Mom, check out what I created!" She actually stepped backward as if his proximity repulsed her. She glanced toward the suited gentleman, who I now recognized as a property agent, and casually remarked something about neighborhood children constantly lingering around. The realtor appeared puzzled and responded, "Ma'am, that child just addressed you as his mother." My father quickly interjected with a dismissive chuckle, informing the man, "Young kids will fabricate anything to get noticed." He then peeled several bills from his stack and handed them to the realtor, adding something about appreciating his discretion. I stood frozen, struggling to comprehend what was unfolding before my eyes. Phoenix asked where our bedroom was located. That's when our mother finally acknowledged our presence directly, fanning herself with what I later discovered were first-class airline tickets. She calmly explained that the house sale had been finalized 2 hours prior, and since I was 14 and Phoenix was 8, it was the perfect opportunity for us to learn self-reliance. I actually laughed out loud because I thought she was joking. Who abandons their own children like this? Then our father delivered the devastating news that he'd sold every single possession we owned on Facebook Marketplace that very morning. Everything, including my deceased grandmother's jewelry box that I kept beneath my bed, which contained the only photographs I had of her. They had systematically erased our entire existence within a single day. Our mother continued rambling about their child-free paradise aspirations. A Mediterranean cruise first, then exploring Asia. They spoke as if they were finally liberated from some terrible burden. That burden was us, their own sons. I started shouting, demanding to know where we were supposed to go, what we were supposed to do. Phoenix was now sobbing uncontrollably, clutching that pottery bowl. Our father simply tossed $2 bills onto the ground and stated, "Bus fare. We're not heartless." Then our mother actually blew us a kiss and told us to avoid getting trafficked, as if it were some kind of twisted joke. They climbed into separate vehicles, Dad in his truck, Mom in her Lexus, and simply drove away. The realtor stood there looking absolutely mortified. He attempted to say something about contacting authorities, but then awkwardly departed as well. I later realized he probably feared legal trouble for his involvement in whatever this situation was. Phoenix was hysterical, and I was in complete shock. We simply stood there on the lawn of what had been our home. The new homeowners were scheduled to move in that same day. A moving truck arrived while we remained standing there, and a couple emerged looking thrilled about their new property. They seemed pleasant enough, but were clearly uncomfortable discovering 2 crying children on their new lawn. They inquired if we were neighbors, and I couldn't formulate a response. I grabbed Phoenix and we walked to a park several blocks away. I attempted calling our parents, but both phone numbers were already disconnected. That's when the full weight of reality crashed down on me. This wasn't some cruel prank. They had meticulously planned this abandonment, probably for months. That night, we slept on the playground equipment. I draped my jacket over Phoenix and promised him everything would be okay. even though I had absolutely no idea what our next steps would be. We had the clothes on our backs, $2, and Phoenix's ceramic bowl, which shattered around midnight when he rolled over in his sleep. The following morning, we went to my friend Devin's house. His mother completely freaked out when I explained what had happened. She immediately tried calling the police. But here's the twisted part. Our parents had filed official paperwork claiming they were sending us to live with our aunt in Idaho. They'd forged her signature on everything. So when law enforcement investigated, it appeared legitimate that we were supposed to be traveling to our aunt's place, not abandoned on the streets. Devin's mother contacted my aunt, whom I'd only met perhaps twice in my life, my mother's older sister. She was furious, not at my parents for what they'd done, but at having to deal with us. Apparently, my parents had been telling extended family members for years that they deeply regretted having children, that we were destroying their lives and draining them financially. They'd been constructing this narrative of being trapped and miserable because of us. My aunt reluctantly agreed to let us stay with her temporarily until she figured out a permanent solution. We took a Greyhound bus to Idaho the next day. 3 days after being abandoned, we were living with an aunt who resented our existence in her cramped apartment in Boise. What I couldn't understand was why. They weren't teenagers forced into premature parenthood. They'd been married 3 years before I was born. Dad was 28 and Mom was 26 when they chose to have me. They deliberately chose to have Phoenix years later. But according to my aunt, they'd been complaining for years about how children destroyed their dreams of traveling the world and living some fantasy lifestyle. Apparently, the breaking point came when Dad's parents died in a car accident 6 months earlier. They weren't particularly close, but Dad inherited a substantial sum of money that suddenly made their freedom fantasy seem achievable. They just needed to eliminate us from the equation first. So that's exactly what they did. They erased us from their lives. For 12 long years, we didn't hear a single word from either of them. My aunt never let us forget we were unwanted burdens. Phoenix developed a severe stutter and crippling anxiety that required years of therapy to manage. I worked every possible job I could find starting at age 15, lying about my age to get hired at a local restaurant washing dishes. I was determined that we wouldn't be dependent on anyone who didn't want us around. We occasionally saw their social media posts. Photographs from Barcelona, Thailand, Bali, living their best child-free lives while we struggled just to survive. They never checked on us, never sent money, never called on our birthdays. Nothing. It was as if we had never existed. Fast forward 12 years. I'm now 26. Phoenix is 20. We've built lives from absolutely nothing. I put myself through community college while working multiple jobs simultaneously. Phoenix is in his second year at State University on a full academic scholarship. We survived despite them, not because of them. Then 4 days ago, we finally executed the plan we'd been meticulously working on for the past year. A plan that began when we discovered our parents had completely blown through their inheritance and relocated back to the United States, desperately trying to rebuild their lives in California. They've been frantically calling and texting for the past 4 days. Over 30 messages, crying, threatening, begging. The tables have completely turned, and honestly, it feels absolutely incredible. But that's not even the most satisfying part. The most satisfying part is they still don't comprehend what they did wrong. My dad's latest voicemail literally said, "After everything we sacrificed for you boys growing up, sacrificed, they abandoned their children with $2. Thanks for all the messages and support. Many of you asked for details about what happened after we were abandoned and how we planned our revenge. So here's the full story. My aunt's place in Boise was a one-bedroom apartment, and she made it crystal clear from day one that we were unwanted burdens. She set up an air mattress in the living room that Phoenix and I shared. The first night there, she sat us down and revealed the real story about our parents. According to her, our mom had been complaining about parenthood since the day I was born. She showed me old emails where Mom discussed how having children ruined her body and destroyed her freedom. Dad apparently went along with everything because he was obsessed with Mom and would do anything to keep her satisfied. I remember my aunt saying something that stuck with me. Your parents didn't abandon you suddenly. They'd been mentally leaving you for years. The first several months were brutal. Phoenix would wake up crying almost every night. He developed a stutter that intensified whenever he felt stressed, which was essentially all the time. My aunt would yell at him to stop the fake stuttering for attention, which only made it worse. School was a nightmare. We started mid-semester without any school records, and I had to explain to teachers why we suddenly moved to Idaho. Most assumed we were troubled kids sent to live with a relative as punishment. Some teachers were understanding, but most just viewed us as additional work they didn't need. After about 3 months, my aunt started dropping not-so-subtle hints about more permanent arrangements, researching foster care information on her laptop, which she conveniently left open for us to see. Message received loud and clear. That's when I got my first job at 14, lying about my age to wash dishes at a local diner. The owner probably knew I wasn't 16 but didn't care as long as I worked hard. I gave my aunt money for rent, which she happily accepted. It wasn't much, but it was enough to prevent her from actively trying to get rid of us. One night, about 6 months after we moved in, I was using my aunt's desktop computer for homework when a notification popped up. It was my mom posting on Instagram. I hadn't even thought to look for them on social media before that moment. There they were, posing on some beach in Thailand. Mom in a bikini, Dad with an obnoxious straw hat, both holding cocktails with tiny umbrellas. The caption read something like, "Day 180 of our freedom tour. Never been happier." I showed Phoenix, which was probably a mistake. He cried for hours that night. After that, I started checking their social media regularly. They posted everything. First-class plane tickets, luxury hotels, tourist attractions in countries I had to look up on a map. All while we were sleeping on an air mattress and eating ramen noodles. When I was 16, I got a second job stocking shelves at a grocery store. Between the two jobs, I was working approximately 50 hours per week while attending school. My grades suffered, but what choice did I have? Phoenix needed stability. I tried reaching out to our parents once when I was 17. I created a new email account and sent them a message, just asking how they were doing. No anger, no accusations, just a simple, "Hey, it's Carter. How are you guys?" No response. I checked their social media the next day, and they'd posted about toxic people from the past trying to drag them down. They didn't name us specifically, but the timing made it pretty obvious. That's when I decided to focus 100% on getting us out of there. I stopped checking their social media. I stopped caring what they were doing. I just worked and saved and tried to be there for Phoenix. By the time I turned 18, I had enough saved for a security deposit on a tiny studio apartment. The day we moved out, my aunt didn't even say goodbye. She just handed me a trash bag containing our few belongings and said, "Don't come back." Phoenix was 12 by then. His stutter was better but still surfaced when he was stressed. I enrolled him in a decent middle school and worked out a schedule where I could drop him off before work and pick him up after. Things actually improved once we were on our own. No more walking on eggshells. No more aunt making snide comments about how we consumed too much food. Our apartment was tiny and in a sketchy neighborhood, but it was ours. I kept working both jobs and added a third one delivering food on weekends. Phoenix started helping too, walking dogs in the neighborhood, mowing lawns, anything to contribute. I hated that he felt compelled to work at that age, but he insisted. I got my GED at 19 and started taking classes at community college while still working. It took me 5 years to complete a 2-year degree because I could only take 1 or 2 classes each semester, but I finished. Phoenix performed way better in school than I did. He was incredibly intelligent and worked twice as hard as his classmates. He joined every club that was free and studied constantly. By his junior year of high school, teachers were discussing college scholarship opportunities with him. The day Phoenix received his first scholarship letter was probably the proudest moment of my life, a full ride to the state university. When he showed me, we both just sat on our worn couch and cried. Good tears, you know, life was finally looking up. I had a decent job. Phoenix was going to college. We had our own place. I'd started dating casually. Nothing serious, but normal stuff. We were building a life. Then last year, something strange happened. I was helping Phoenix move into his dorm for freshman year when my phone dinged with a Venmo notification. Someone had sent me $50 with a message, "Happy birthday, son." It was from my dad. I hadn't even realized it was my birthday. And after 12 years of absolute silence, suddenly he remembers. I was stunned at first, then absolutely furious. $50, after everything. I declined the payment and blocked the account, but it made me curious. I hadn't looked them up in years. So that night I searched for them online. Turns out they'd run out of money. Their great adventure had ended about 2 years earlier when they burned through all their inheritance. According to their social media, They'd moved back to the US and were living in San Diego. Dad was trying to restart his sales career, and Mom was attempting to rebuild her real estate business. Their posts had shifted from exotic vacation photos to hustle culture nonsense and networking events. That's when the idea started forming. They'd abandoned us when they were on top, and now they were struggling. It felt like the universe was handing us an opportunity. I showed Phoenix everything I'd found. We stayed up all night discussing it. At first he was hesitant. He'd worked hard to move past what happened. But the more we talked, the more he warmed up to the idea. We started planning, not just some petty revenge like signing them up for spam emails. Something that would really make them feel what we felt. Something that would take away their security just like they'd taken away ours. The plan took shape over several months. We researched, we plotted, we prepared. Phoenix was actually the mastermind behind most of it. Turns out all those years of being quiet and observing people made him remarkably skilled at understanding how to get under someone's skin. We learned that our parents were trying to rebuild their reputation in San Diego. They were networking aggressively, trying to establish themselves in the local business community. Dad was attempting to start a small investment group, and Mom was working with a real estate team. The final piece fell into place when we discovered they were organizing a business mixer to attract potential investors and clients. It was scheduled for last week at a hotel downtown. That's when we knew it was time. We drove down to San Diego, checked into a cheap motel, and prepared for the main event. What happened next is hard to even describe. Let's just say we showed up at their event and they didn't recognize us at first. Why would they? In their minds, we were still children, but we're not children anymore. The look on their faces when they finally realized who we were, I'll never forget it as long as I live. After we discovered our parents were back in the US and struggling financially, Phoenix and I spent about 2 weeks digging up everything we could find about them. We didn't want to half-ass this. We wanted to truly understand what they were doing and how to hit them where it would hurt the most. Social media proved to be a goldmine. Dad had created this entire fake persona as a self-made entrepreneur and investment guru, the type who posts motivational quotes with pictures of himself in suits. Mom was doing the typical realtor thing, posting glamour shots next to sold signs and talking about helping families find their forever homes. The irony was suffocating. Phoenix found their business website, which was basically a landing page for Dad's new investment group that supposedly helped small businesses secure funding. The site was full of stock photos and buzzwords, but light on actual details about what they did. Classic Dad, all presentation, no substance. We joined some San Diego Facebook groups and started asking subtle questions about local business events. Someone mentioned this mixer our parents were organizing at the Marina Hotel. It was supposed to be this upscale networking event for elite business leaders. $500 per ticket. When we saw that, we both had the same thought. They're desperate for money and trying to appear successful to attract investors. That's when Phoenix suggested our approach. Instead of just showing up and confronting them, which would be satisfying but short-lived, we could actually infiltrate their business world, become the investors they were desperately seeking, get them to pin their hopes on us, then pull the rug out, just like they did to us. So we started building fake identities. Phoenix created a LinkedIn profile for me as Carter Mitchell, using my first name but a different last name, and positioned me as a venture scout for a larger investment firm. We borrowed a friend's suit for profile pictures, and Phoenix photoshopped me into some conference backgrounds. We kept it vague enough to be believable, but impressive enough to catch attention. We also needed someone on the inside to validate us. That's where my girlfriend Becky came in. She wasn't originally part of the plan, but when I told her what we were doing, she was all in. Her exact words were, "Those monsters deserve whatever's coming." She has a cousin in San Diego who works in event planning, and through her, Becky got information about other attendees and the venue setup. About 3 weeks before the event, I sent an email to the contact on their website expressing interest in attending as a potential investor. I mentioned I was looking for opportunities in the San Diego area and had heard about their group through a mutual connection, intentionally vague. The response came within minutes. Dad himself replied, super enthusiastic, offering to comp my ticket and even suggesting a private meeting before the main event. He was so eager it was almost pathetic. Reading his emails, you'd think I was some billionaire ready to hand over a blank check. I strung him along, asking questions about their business model, their current investors, projected returns, all the stuff a real investor would ask. Each time, his answers got more elaborate and the projected returns got higher. Classic pyramid scheme vibes. 2 weeks before the event, I casually mentioned I could potentially bring $250,000 of initial investment if the right opportunity presented itself. That's when Mom joined the email chain, suggesting they could give me a VIP tour of some properties they were developing. These people who abandoned their kids with $2 were now practically begging for my attention because they thought I had money. Meanwhile, Phoenix was doing reconnaissance. He found their address through property records. They were renting, not owning, another sign they were broke. He drove by a few times to get a feel for their routine. He discovered Dad drove a leased BMW that was 2 months behind on payments. The repo notice was visible on the dashboard when he peeked in. Sloppy. Mom was driving a 10-year-old Lexus, the same one she drove away in the day they abandoned us. Phoenix also found their favorite coffee shop by following Mom one morning. He sat a few tables away and just observed. She spent the whole time on her phone taking selfies that made it look like she was in business meetings. At one point, she even staged a fake phone call, talking loudly about $1 million listing while the barista rolled his eyes behind her back. The week of the event, I confirmed our attendance, myself and my financial advisor, Phoenix. Dad sent over a schedule that included a private dinner the night before with select premium investors. The desperation was palpable. We drove down to San Diego 2 days early to prepare. Becky came with us for moral support and to help with last-minute details. We checked into a cheap motel about 20 minutes from the venue. That night, we went over our plan again, making sure we had all our facts straight and our story consistent. The day before the big event, we did a dry run, drove to the hotel, checked out the ballroom where the mixer would be held, timed how long it would take to get from our motel to the venue. Phoenix was nervous. His stutter tends to return when he's stressed, and we knew that could blow our cover. We practiced some breathing exercises his therapist had taught him. That night, I had trouble sleeping. Part of me still couldn't believe we were actually doing this. After 12 years of trying to move forward, we were deliberately stepping back into their lives. But every time I considered backing out, I remembered Phoenix crying on that playground the first night after they abandoned us. I remembered working until my hands bled at 16 just so we could eat. And any doubt vanished. The day of the event arrived. We got dressed in the suits we'd bought at a thrift store and had professionally tailored. Not cheap, but worth it to look the part. Becky helped fix our ties and took pictures for evidence. As she put it, there was this moment when Phoenix and I looked at each other in the mirror, all dressed up, and it hit me how far we'd come from those abandoned kids. We arrived at the hotel 30 minutes early for our private meeting with Dad. The plan was for me to go in first, with Phoenix joining later as my advisor. I spotted Dad immediately in the hotel lobby. Older, grayer, but unmistakably him. He was pacing nervously, checking his watch every few seconds. I walked up and introduced myself as Carter Mitchell. He shook my hand enthusiastically, showing no sign of recognition. Why would he? In his mind, his son was still a teenager, not a suited adult. We sat down in the lobby bar, and he launched into his pitch about his investment group and their proprietary model for identifying undervalued opportunities. Asked pointed questions, the kind that would make any legitimate businessman uncomfortable. Where was their audited track record? Who were their current investors? What was their management fee structure? With each question, he got more flustered, making up answers on the spot or deflecting with vague industry jargon. After about 20 minutes, I texted Phoenix to join us. He walked in confidently, introduced himself as my financial advisor, and sat down. Dad shook his hand without a second glance. We were just potential money to him, not people. Certainly not his children. Mom arrived about 10 minutes later. She was dressed expensively, but everything looked slightly dated, like she was wearing her last good outfits from the good days. She kissed Dad on the cheek and turned to us with a practiced real estate agent smile. She extended her hand to me and said she was thrilled to meet someone of my caliber. The four of us moved to a private dining room for dinner. Throughout the meal, they pitched their business model, which was basically getting investors to fund property developments, skimming fees off the top, and promising unrealistic returns. It was barely legal and clearly desperate. I mentioned casually that I had grown up in Oregon, watching for any reaction. Mom just nodded politely and said Oregon was charming, but she preferred more cosmopolitan environments. Not a flicker of connection. Phoenix asked about their family, whether they had children who would eventually join the business. Dad laughed uncomfortably and said they had chosen the child-free lifestyle to focus on their passions. Mom jumped in to add that children weren't compatible with their vision. They had completely erased us from their narrative. Throughout dinner, Phoenix was recording everything on his phone in his pocket. Not just for the revenge, but for our own validation. Proof that we weren't crazy. That they really were these callous people who could sit across from their own sons and not recognize them. After dinner, we moved to the main event, the mixer in the hotel ballroom. About 50 people were there, mostly older couples trying to look wealthy and important. Dad introduced me to everyone as a major potential investor, and people flocked around us like we were celebrities. That's when we implemented phase 2 of our plan. I started mentioning to people that I was particularly interested in their group because of their family values and integrity. I asked other attendees if they'd had good experiences with the couple, if they seemed trustworthy, just planting seeds of doubt. Meanwhile, Phoenix was doing the same on the other side of the room, subtly questioning their business model and hinting that he'd heard concerning things about their past ventures. Nothing specific, just enough to make people uncomfortable. As the night went on, I could see Dad getting more desperate for commitment. He pulled me aside and offered me founder status if I invested that night, a special rate not available to others. I told him I was definitely interested but needed to see some documentation first, specifically their background and history. That's when he started getting personal, sharing his life story, a completely fabricated version where he and Mom had built everything from scratch through hard work and determination. No mention of inheritance money, no mention of abandoning 2 kids. According to him, they'd had some setbacks during the recession but were now poised for a comeback. I nodded sympathetically and said I admired people who were honest about their past. I mentioned that I always did thorough background checks before investing. Standard procedure. His face twitched slightly. By the end of the night, they were practically salivating at the prospect of my investment. Dad had moved from offering founder status to suggesting I could be a partner in the business. Mom had invited me to tour properties the next day. They gave me a folder full of glossy brochures and projections, showing how my $250,000 could turn into millions within years. As we were leaving, I told them I'd be in touch tomorrow with my decision. Dad actually hugged me. Mom kissed my cheek and called me like the son we never had. That was the moment, the perfect setup for what would come next. Phoenix and I got back to our motel, still in shock that they hadn't recognized us at all. Not our faces, not our names, not even our voices. We were truly nothing to them. We stayed up late finalizing the last details of our plan. The next day would be the real revenge, the part where we'd reveal ourselves and watch their fake world collapse. What we didn't expect was that they'd call me at 7 a.m. the next morning, inviting us to breakfast to finalize the details. They couldn't even wait a few hours. The desperation was real, and that's when we knew we had them exactly where we wanted them. This is it. The finale. Thanks for writing this out with me. Writing all this has been weirdly therapeutic. We met our parents for breakfast at a fancy hotel restaurant at 8 a.m. Dad looked like he hadn't slept at all. His eyes were bloodshot, and he kept fidgeting with his napkin. Mom was trying really hard to look put together, but her makeup was caked on like she'd applied it in a hurry. We'd agreed on a signal beforehand. I would tap my water glass twice when it was time to start. Phoenix was nervous as hell, but holding it together. Becky was waiting in the hotel lobby as our backup, with our overnight bags packed in the car in case things went sideways. Dad started by sliding a folder across the table with paperwork, investment agreements, partnership documents, all that stuff. He'd already filled in my fake name and was pointing at the signature line, talking about how we could finalize everything right now and he'd take me to the bank. Immediately after breakfast, Mom kept cutting in to talk about how excited she was to welcome me to the family and how I reminded her of someone, but she couldn't quite place it. The irony was so thick I could barely keep a straight face. I asked more questions about their background, pretending to do last-minute due diligence. Had they always been in business together? Any children or dependents I should know about? Any past legal issues? Dad got this weird tight smile and said they'd always prioritize their professional aspirations over traditional family structures, like having kids was some exotic lifestyle choice. Mom nodded along and added that they'd made certain sacrifices for success. That's when I tapped my glass twice. Phoenix pulled out his phone and placed it on the table, then pulled up a photo. It was the last school picture we'd taken before they abandoned us. He turned it around to face them. For a second, there was just confusion on their faces. Then this slow dawning recognition. Mom's eyes got huge. Dad stopped mid-sentence about investment potential. I leaned forward and said, "So about those sacrifices for success? Would those include selling your house while your kids were at school and abandoning them with $2 in bus fare?" Dad recovered first, lowering his voice and asking what kind of scam we were trying to pull. Mom was frantically looking around the restaurant like she was afraid someone might overhear. Phoenix spoke up then, which was huge because he was terrified his stutter would come back. He said, "You told me to try not to get trafficked, Mom, right before you drove away in your Lexus. Remember?" The color drained from her face. Dad tried to stand up, but I put my hand on his arm and told him he might want to hear us out first. I mentioned that several people from last night's event were having breakfast in the same restaurant, including potential investors, and they probably wouldn't appreciate hearing how the hosts had abandoned their children. That got him back in his seat real quick. What followed was the most surreal 20 minutes of my life. First, they tried denial, claiming we must be confused or making it up. Then came anger. How dare we show up and threaten their reputation? Then bargaining. Maybe we could discuss this privately. Surely we could come to some arrangement. The whole time, Phoenix was calmly recording everything on his phone. Not secretly, right out in the open. Every pathetic excuse, every desperate attempt to shut us up. I pulled out a manila envelope and placed it on the table. Inside was evidence we'd compiled. The original deed to our house in Oregon, with their signatures on the sale documents dated the day they left us. Photos of us as kids with them. Statements from our aunt confirming they'd abandoned us. Then I pulled out the agreement they just handed me and pointed to where it mentioned full disclosure of any potential liabilities or conflicts. I explained that abandoning minor children probably counted as a liability, and falsifying documents to make it look like we were going to our aunt's was definitely fraud. Dad grabbed the investment agreement and tried to rip it up. But I just laughed and told him I had digital copies of everything from the folder, which Phoenix had photographed while they were distracted. That's when Mom started crying, but not sad crying, angry crying. She hissed that we had no right to come back after all these years and ruin what they'd built. That we'd always been ungrateful and difficult children who never appreciated their sacrifices. I lost it at that point. I wasn't planning to, but hearing her talk about sacrifices after what they did, I stood up and asked her exactly what sacrifices she'd made. Was it a sacrifice to sell the jewelry box my dead grandmother gave me? Was it a sacrifice to tell an 8-year-old boy to try not to get trafficked before driving away forever? People were definitely staring now. Dad tried to grab my arm to pull me back into my seat, but I yanked it away. Phoenix stood up too and started listing off all the things we'd gone through. Sleeping on a playground, working at 14. Our aunt's resentment. Him developing a stutter from the trauma. Mom was frantically trying to quiet us down, saying people were listening. Dad was attempting to salvage the situation, telling nearby tables we were disturbed individuals making false claims. That's when an older couple from the event last night came over. The woman asked if everything was okay, looking genuinely concerned. Dad tried to play it off, but Phoenix, in the most steady voice I've ever heard from him, told them we were his parents' abandoned children whom they'd just failed to recognize after 12 years. The look of disgust on that woman's face was something I'll never forget. She and her husband just walked out without another word. 2 other couples followed them. Dad looked like he was going to have a stroke. He stood up and accused us of destroying their business prospects. I reminded him that we hadn't forced them to abandon their children or lie about it afterward. Those were choices they made all on their own. Mom started damage control, trying to call after the leaving couples, but it was too late. The word was spreading around the restaurant. People were staring and whispering. That's when I delivered the final blow. I told them we'd reached out to every person on their investor list, which we'd gotten from Dad's laptop bag when he went to the bathroom the night before, careless with his passwords as always. We'd sent emails early that morning detailing our story. With evidence attached, Mom actually slapped me across the face. Hard A. Waiter, who'd been watching the whole thing, immediately came over and told her the police would be called if there was any more physical aggression. Dad looked defeated. He asked what we wanted. Money to ruin them completely? What would make us go away? I told them we didn't want their money. We'd survived and built lives without them. What we wanted was for them to live with the consequences of their actions, just like we'd had to. For them to feel what it's like to have everything suddenly taken away. We got up to leave. Mom grabbed Phoenix's arm and started saying he'd always been her special boy, and she'd missed him every day. Complete lies, since she hadn't recognized him yesterday. Phoenix just looked at her hand until she let go. He didn't say a word to her. As we walked out, Dad followed us, begging us to take down the emails, saying we were destroying their lives over one mistake. I stopped and told him it wasn't one mistake. It was a choice they made and reinforced every day for 12 years by not trying to find us, not sending money, not checking if we were even alive. We left them standing in the hotel lobby as people from the mixer walked past, giving them disgusted looks. Several people approached us outside asking if we were okay and saying they'd had no idea about our parents' past. We drove back to our motel, picked up Becky, and headed home. The revenge was done. We'd exposed them publicly, tanked their business prospects, and made sure everyone in their new social circle knew exactly who they were. The messages started about 2 hours later. First texts saying they were sorry, that they'd made a horrible mistake, that they wanted to make it right. Then calls that we didn't answer. Then voicemails first,